month. Either that or I just forget where it is every month. Let's see. Alrighty. Um, well, let's get started then.
Hello,
Hello,
Bob
I am Paul
speaking.
Miles with the International Society for Biblical Hermeneutics, and I am here with Morgan Arnold, who will be presenting
Yeah,
on
that would be me, Zach.
postmillennialism's
And
blindness toward Israel
as I mentioned
as
in the
part
note,
of
just wondering
the
if you have a
ISBH series on Israel
Spanish-speaking
and the
provider.
church. Uh, Morgan, take it away.
All right,
All
great.
right,
Thanks for calling back.
very good. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen right here?
Yes,
All
we
right.
can.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm totally blind to the faces now, so but we're going to be talking about blindness today too. So we're going to be talking today about postmillennial
I'm not
blindness
seeing
towards
your screen quite
Israel.
yet, Morgan. Uh,
Okay,
let's
it
see.
says that you are
Oh, okay.
I'm screen sharing.
I see it now.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So Um, I knew that this was not a boring group, a stuffy group. So there may be, if you're very careful and very sensitive, you may be able to hear a little bit of humor that comes through the presentation here. But a lot of times it's dad humor, and so you dads will probably get it. If you're not a dad, you may not get it. But anyway, post-millennial blindness towards Israel is the topic for today. And this presentation comes from a paper that I wrote that's included in the latest edition of Pneumatikos, which is the Schaeffer Journal, the Schaeffer Seminary Journal. In fact, I don't know if you can see me, but I've got it. You probably can't see me, but it's hot off the press. It's burning right now. It's so hot. I got my copy in the mail yesterday. There we go. And so you can see a copy of that. And I was blessed to have an article that was chosen and selected to be a part of this journal. So I really want to encourage you, if you are not familiar with the Pneumatikos Journal, which Paul Miles is actually the editor in chief for it. He does a fantastic job. These are great articles each month. Maybe Paul can put a link in the chat notes so that's how somebody can get a hold of one of these copies, either online or a physical copy as well. I always like physical copies. And maybe it's just a little bit of old school that's in me. But I wrote an article that was called Rose-Colored Blinders, and it's a look at Greg Bahnsen's postmillennialism. And we'll talk about who he was and what postmillennialism is. I imagine many of you probably already know about postmillennialism are terms like preterist, but we'll kind of cover those today to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So in the article, I highlight a wide range of premillennialist and preterist views as they deal with eschatology, as they deal with ecclesiology, as they deal with satanology. But for this presentation, I'm just going to focus on Bahnsen's view of the church and of the nation of Israel. Okay. So this is the book that I got a chance to take a look at. Now, how did I get into this? Because I had no idea of what postmillennialism was several years ago. But I have a young friend of mine. He's almost like a second son to me, and he was my son's best friend growing up. They played baseball together. We got a chance to minister to his family. The family started coming to church with us. He got saved. But then, not long after that, he got involved with a group from, I want to say it's either out Arizona. I think it's Arizona, called Apologia Radio. It's a Calvinist podcast, and the guy that is kind of in charge of that is a guy named Pastor Jeff Durbin, if you're familiar with that name. Well, my young friend, long story short, became a young, restless and reformed believer, and he was exposed to postmillennialism. And so he and I got a chance to play frisbee golf one day. He's really big into frisbee golf, and as we're kind of walking through and playing frisbee golf, he was telling me how great postmillennialism was, and he was telling me all these things that he was learning And I said, well, I don't know much about it, but it doesn't sound like what I've been taught from the scriptures. And so I said, well, to give me one book, if you had to recommend one book that kind of really tells me and can help me understand postmillennialism, what would it be? And he told me about this book right here, Victory in Jesus, The Bright Hope of Postmillennialism. And so I bought a copy of it. And for one of my classes at Schaeffer Seminary, I actually read the book and gave that book report on it and gave a detailed paper on it. And that's that paper that was now included with the Pneumatikos journal. So I wrote this paper and I gave it back to my friend, and he read it, but he never got back with me and responded to it. But I hope it made him think a little bit. But this book was first released in 2015. And there's a second edition that came out in 2020, and that second edition is the one that I'm using right here. It's a collection by a gentleman named Greg Bahnsen of 3 lectures and 2 public works that he had published in the Journal of Christian Reconstruction. It was compiled by Robert Booth, who's the head of Covenant Media Press. He's also a pastor at Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church in Nacogdoches, Texas, which is in East Texas. One thing you'll see a commonality as we kind of go through this, that you might say the Mecca of postmillennialism is here in the East Texas. We actually live in East Texas, and around the Tyler area, and some of those places that are really the hotbeds for postmillennial thinking and covenant theology. So anyway, that's a little bit about that, the book that we're going to go to. So who is this guy named Greg Bahnsen? Greg Bahnsen, unfortunately, he only lived to be 47. He had a heart condition, and he actually passed away at the age of 47. But he was an American Calvinist philosopher. He was a Christian apologist, a minister in the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. And he was a full-time scholar in residence in Southern California. You can see the Center for Christian Studies there. But really, if there was a Mount Rushmore of postmillennial thinkers, Greg Bahnsen's face would be on that Mount Rushmore, I believe. Especially if he had lived to be in the 70s and 80s. If he was alive today, there's no telling how many more books and what kind of presence he would have had on the internet. Obviously, dying when he passed away in 95, he was. This was before the internet, so you think how popular he would have been in our day and age. But he was a leading proponent of theonomy, and also postmillennialism and presuppositional apologetics. And I'll talk quickly about some of those things. But he was really one of the original pillars of Christian Reconstructionism. And so what Christian Reconstructionism is, it's a theonomic movement developed primarily under the guise of R.J. Rushdoony. You might recognize some of these names, Rushdoony, and Gary Bahnsen here, and also a gentleman named Gary North. And basically, they've had tangible influence on the Christian right here in the United States. And the central theme of their thinking with theonomy or with Reconstructionism, is that society should be reconstructed under the lordship of Jesus Christ in all areas of life, in all parts of culture. So Reconstructionists, they advocate for theonomy, which is a hypothetical. It's not been implemented that I know of anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world, but it's a hypothetical Christian form of government in which divine law governs societies, which means that theonomy presumes that Israel's Old Testament judicial laws have not been abrogated. Okay, so that the Old Testament law is still in effect today, which means that all civil governments must enforce Mosaic laws. And this means that the death penalty is not only included for murder, but somebody can also receive the death penalty for idolatry, for homosexuality, for adultery, for witchcraft, for blasphemy. And I started thinking, I said, you talk about a population control measure, that would be one. I don't know what the population of the United States would be if theonomy was enacted, right? Less, elsewhere around the world as well. But related to theonomy is another term you may have heard of called dominion theology or dominionism. So prominent adherents to dominionism includes the Calvinist Reconstructionism, but it also includes charismatic and Pentecostal kingdom now theology. And there's links even to what's been called the New Apostolic Reformation, or you may have heard it called the NAR, in their belief in a seven mountain mandate, whereby they push to really invade and dominate the seven spheres of society, which include the family, and religion, and education, and media, and entertainment, and business, and then government as well. Now, unfortunately, there's members of this group that have been given access and acceptance by the Trump White House. You might have heard the name Paula White. Paula White is a self-proclaimed prophetess in this movement. She borderlines calling herself an apostle, but she is in this sphere of influence, and she's been named as President Trump's spiritual advisor, and even holds an office. I think it's called like the Faith. I don't know if the Faith Bureau or some sort of an office that's been created for faith and religion there within the White House. And so she has his ear, and she is one of these Christian Reconstructionists, and she is of the post-millennial thought group here. So trying to bring heaven down to earth so that we are currently living in the kingdom now and their thoughts. So who had influence upon Greg Bahnsen? Real quickly, I'm just giving you this background so that as we get into talking about Israel and the church, you kind of understand what the mindset is of Bahnsen as we get into this, okay? So two of the major influences of Bahnsen's life were Cornelius Van Til, okay, who is really the father of presuppositional apologetics, you might say, and also R.J. Rushdoony, who is recognized as the father of Christian Reconstructionism. But there's also, some of these guys as well, even though we would disagree with him as far as their eschatology, they were very active in other movements. And so Rushdoony, for example, and Bahnsen were very involved in the homeschool movement here in the United States to get kids out of public schools from going through that indoctrination from the public school system to get them into being taught again by the family, by the parents within the homeschool movement. And so in addition to Bahnsen, Rushdoony also had an influence upon Gary North, who just passed away a few years ago. Also, he lives over here in East Texas as well. He was a very prolific writer and an author and speaker along the lines of Reconstructionism and Dominionism and postmillennialism and preterist thought. And so Gary North ended up being Rushdoony's son-in-law. So the apple did not go too far from the tree once it fell. So basically, Gary North, he founded a think tank that's called the Christian Institute, or the Institute for Christian Economics in Tyler, Texas. Okay, the Institute for Christian Economics in Tyler, Texas. All right, so then Bahnsen had a huge influence back in the 70s and 80s, and at one point when he was teaching at the Reformed Theological Seminary, he had three students who became very prominent voices within postmillennialism. One of them was David Chilton, who unfortunately also passed away at a very young age from a stroke, unfortunately. but was a prolific writer and speaker. Gary DeMar, you may have heard of him, has a lot of books out on preterism, has a podcast, I believe, Gary DeMar, who actually lives in East Texas as well. And then you have Kenneth Gentry. Kenneth Gentry may be the most well-known of them, a seminary professor, speaker, has written many, many books on preterism and on postmillennialism. And Gentry says, Kenneth, excuse me, Kenneth Gentry says that I believe it's safe to say that Dr. Bahnsen is largely responsible for the recent resurge or resurgence in evangelical preterism in general and the preterist approach to revelation in particular. So Gentry gives Bahnsen high praise for the time that he spent developing this thought and promoting this idea. Now, many of you guys probably realize that postmillennialism in the 19th century, postmillennialism was probably the predominant thought or the predominant belief system in eschatology. But then basically the idea was, through man's ingenuity and as the gospel goes out into all the world, that more and more people are going to be Christians, and before long, the world is going to be Christianized, and we're just going to have rainbows and marshmallows everywhere on the planet, right? But then something happened in the 20th century that just crushed the idea of postmillennialism. We had a couple of world wars, didn't we? And after those world wars, in the first half of the 20th century, and especially with the rise of communism, many people left postmillennialism in droves. Obviously, the world was not getting better. The world was getting worse. And so this pie in the sky mentality just didn't fly in their thoughts. And so many people left postmillennialism. And so it wasn't until the last half of the 20th century, for some reason, unbeknownst to me, there became a rise, a repopularization of this postmillennial thought. And Bahnsen was one of the ones that helped spur this on. Okay, so let me define real quickly some of these $20 terms that I've been talking about, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Postmillennialism sees Christ's second coming as occurring after the millennium, whereas we, as premillennialists, dispensationalists, we believe that Christ's second coming comes before the millennium, that Christ, when he comes a second time, he'll usher in the messianic age. But in the postmillennial mind, we're basically in the kingdom, we're in the messianic kingdom right now. And so their job is to usher in the kingdom so that, or usher in, or bring the kingdom to a certain point, so that once the kingdom receives a certain amount of visibility on the earth, that's when Jesus will come back to earth again. So it's up to them to make sure that that happens. Okay. Postmillennialism. There's also the word that starts with P, that it's preterism. So a lot of times people think that preterism and postmillennialism are synonyms, but they're really not. They cover two different things. However, most postmillennialists are also preterists, and most preterists are also postmillennialists, I believe. So the preterism is the idea that it's the eschatological view or belief that interprets some prophecies, which would be considered partial preterists, and most preterists are partial preterists, in that some prophecies of the Bible have already been fulfilled, or there is a small group that consider themselves full preterists and believing that all the prophecies of the Old Testament and the New Testament have already been fulfilled in history. And so that's where we get the word preterism, which means past. So all these prophecies have been fulfilled in the past. Okay, so again, postmillennialism is really dealing with a system that we're speaking about the millennium and when Jesus is going to return. Preterism is talking more about fulfilled prophecies during the time here. So, all right. So postmillennialism and preterism. So Bahnsen has 7 essentials for postmillennialism. And so it's almost, you think of Charles Ryrie, who had the 3 sine qua non for dispensationalism. Bahnsen's come up with 7 essentials, almost like they're sine qua non for what it means to be a postmillennialist. Well, first of all, as we've already talked about, 1, Christ will return after the millennium. Number 2, the millennium or the kingdom of Christ is a present reality spanning the inter-advent age. And so when Jesus came the first time, he ushered in the millennium, and it's continued on for 2,000 years now. So hence, you can kind of see there that they don't take a literal view of the millennium, 1,000-year period, because it's already been 2,000 years. And so that the millennium will, once the earth is at the right point and it's ripe for the picking, then Jesus will come back and that will end the millennium. Okay, so it's between the 2 advents. Okay, Bahnsen says this about the millennium: Revelation is a highly figurative book. There are many poetic images and figures of speech and symbols and so forth, and therefore we are not inclined to begin by reading the 1,000 in a literal way any more than we should read the 1,000 literally when the psalmist says to the Lord, or that says that the Lord owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Now, does that mean that God does not own the cattle on hill 1,001 or 1,002 and so forth? Of course not. It's a way that talks about a long period of time or quantity, a great quantity. So you can see here, now we get a chance to see the hermeneutic of Bahnsen right here and other postmillennialists, where they will pick and choose what they think is supposed to be literal and what's supposed to be figurative. And so we see that in Revelation chapter 20, that the Apostle John refers to a 1,000-year period 6 times. He uses that phrase, 1,000 years, 6 times in 6 verses, right? And so don't you think that if John meant to get his point across that he's talking about a literal 1,000 years, that he wouldn't have done it, he would have done it 6 times unless he meant what he says. He's trying to get the point across. These are a literal 1,000 years for the millennium. And so basically to spiritualize the length of the millennium and to take liberties with the text like they've done right here, they're taking John's literal words and equating them with the poetry, a different genre, right? The poetry that is in the Psalms, just so that it matches your theological belief system. Well, that's outright scriptural abuse. And we'll talk about that. That's one of the downfalls of his interpretive lenses that he wears. And so look at verse 12, or look at here, my slide 12. So it says here that the millennium, number 3, represents a period that will see the growth and maturation of righteousness and peace and prosperity for Christ's kingdom on the earth. And to me, that kind of sounds a little bit like the prosperity gospel. I don't know how much the prosperity gospel is prevalent over there in Great Britain or elsewhere, but over here in the United States, the prosperity gospel is the predominant view that you'll find here on TV. So basically, what Bahnsen is saying here is all you have to do is just look in the mirror and repeat the phrase, "I am healthy, I am wealthy, and by golly, people like me," right? And so basically putting a sunshiny face on his theology, thinking that by having Christ's kingdom on earth right now means that we are going to be in a period of prosperity, both literal and spiritual. And then the return of Christ, number 4, will synchronize with the general resurrection and the general judgment at the end of the age. And so postmillennial exegesis is actually presuppositional exegesis or eisegesis that leads to eschatological reductionism, which what I mean by that is that there's sort of, I want to say maybe a laziness or an inability to dive deeper into the text to study, because as we study the different judgments in the Bible, we see that that there's a Bema Seat judgment for believers one day in the future, right? There is a great white throne judgment that's going to be for unbelievers. We have the sheep and goat judgment in Matthew in the Olivet Discourse. We have the judgment of the Jews during the tribulation. You know, that after the tribulation period, they're in Ezekiel chapter 20. We have all kinds of judgments, but post-mills try to apply what's been called the ram, cram, and jam method of Bible interpretation. They combine all the judgments into one final judgment. And this exposes a lack of scholarly sophistication. Now, number 5 is this: the millennial kingdom on earth will be the international prosperity of the church. And they call the church the new Israel. So you can kind of see we've got some replacement theology going on here, replacing Israel with the church, and basically its growth and influence in society and culture. And then we have the big one right here. This is what we're going to focus our time on, is that the Old Testament prophecies of prosperity for the kingdom, they're going to be both figuratively and literally interpreted according to the demands of context, both local and wider, as pointing ahead, not simply beyond the church age to a restored Jewish kingdom or the eternal state, but to the visible prosperity of Christ's established kingdom on the earth, climaxing in the consummated glory of the eternal state. So there is a continuity between the Old Testament Israel and the New Testament church. So they would believe that there is only one people of God. There can only be one people of God at one time. And so since Israel has forfeited that right, now the church, the New Testament church, has replaced Israel, and the Old Testament Israel has lost their seat at the table and will not be fed any meals in the future either. So basically, but one day there will be some physical Jews that will be grafted back into the people of God, but they believe that these Jews will be part of the church in the end times, and so Israel loses its distinctiveness as a result of them rejecting the Messiah 2,000 years ago. Okay, and the last one is this: over the long range, the world will experience a period of extraordinary righteousness and prosperity. There's that word again, right? Prosperity, as the church triumphs in the preaching of the gospel and discipling the nations through the supernatural agency of the Holy Spirit. However, the release of Satan, this is key, at the very end of the age will bring apostasy from these blessed conditions. So they have the understanding that at this point in time, Satan is bound. Okay, so we talk about that in Revelation chapter 20. So since they believe that we're in the millennium right now, they also believe that Satan, newsflash to me, newsflash to everyone, right? But Satan is actually bound at this point in time. Okay, so all that stuff that's happening in the world today, that's not the result from Satan or his influence or his demonic minions or anything like that. So all it takes is a cursory glance at the news headlines, and you can see that Christ's enemies have not been fashioned into a submissive footrest. That is what they believe. Psalm 110. And this is the reason why many people left postmillennialism in the past, right? We don't see nations bowing down before Jesus. And this is why it's so hard to understand why postmillennialism has made a comeback in recent times. Okay. We see the evangelical church not thriving in the West. It's actually declining in the West, according to many surveys. And so, whereas they believe that since the gospel is going out all across the world, there's going to be a time and day when basically everybody's going to be a Christian one of these days. Well, we just don't see that happening according to the evidence. It would be great if it happened, but it doesn't seem like that's what the plan is, or what is going to be, what's happening according to the scriptures. Now, here we have Bahnsen's satanology. Just want to basically give you just what he believes here. Satan is not the formidable foe to Christians and their great commission, which so many writers are making him out to be in these days. His work is no real threat to the progress of God's kingdom. Isn't it amazing that he believes this? And so many people that hold to this view believe that Satan is not a formidable foe to Christians in the spread of the gospel. So in Bahnsen's words, the devil is not a roaring lion. He's just a cute kitten. You just need to understand that he has some fits every now and then. So that's what Satan wants you to think, right? So anyway, that's since us dispensationalists kind of liked our charts, I thought I would find a chart that kind of helped explain postmillennial thinking. And first of all, we see here that the millennial reign of Christ began when Jesus came to earth. And ever since that point in time, with the birth of the church, you had an increased manifestation of the kingdom that continues to increase and increase and increase, while Satan is bound during the church age. To the point that at the very end of the days, there's going to be a large-scale conversion of Jews, as they will convert to become Christians and become part of the church. And then at the very end, Satan's going to be released again from the abyss, and there'll be a final rebellion, and there'll be some apostasy going on. And then that's when Jesus will come back and close out the millennial period, and will enter into, I believe, the eternal state. Okay, so a lot different than the pre-tribulation, pre-millennial eschatology that we would hold to. And so basically, if there was a slogan for post-millennial thinking, I would just have to say it would be, everything is awesome. Everything is cool when you're on the post-mill team. Okay. But actually, whenever you read the Bible and you interpret the scriptures and you take a look and see what's going to happen in the last days, using a literal, grammatical, historical, and contextual hermeneutic, we see in actuality that everything is broken, right? Everything is broken. It won't get fixed until Jesus returns. It's from the Lego movie. So again, I'm showing my colors right here. So basically, Bahnsen's belief concerning Israel and the church, one, is that God is covenantally done with Israel. God's done with Israel and his thinking. Number two, prosperity promises to Israel are given to the church. Number three, misidentification of Israel in the book of Revelation. And number four, Israel will be destroyed by God. I know when I read through this the very first time, my jaw hit the floor. I could not believe that somebody could get this information or come to these conclusions by reading the scriptures in a plain, literal sense. And obviously, that's what he's not done. So we're going to take a look at each one of these. Very first one here, God is covenantally done with Israel. So when we're talking about the seven sealed scroll that's in Revelation chapters 5 and 6, the scroll judgments, or the seal judgment, I should say, of the seal judgments, Bahnsen says the important thing for the church living in persecution in John's day is to see that Christ is going to defeat all of their enemies. They're going to see the victory of Christ's kingdom. There's going to be a judgment prophecy against a particular nation, and that nation is Israel. And then God is going to be finally done covenantally with these people who have crucified the Messiah. Isn't that amazing? So you can see that Bahnsen has drifted into a spiritual interpretation of the purpose of the sealed judgments. And so Bahnsen's interpretation is biblically flawed. And you might even say that there appears to be a hint of anti-Semitism here. but he sees that the real judgments, not God's wrath being poured out upon an unbelieving world, but he sees God's wrath being focused upon, in these sealed judgments being focused upon the church's the main enemy, which is Israel. So he takes the sealed judgments are against Israel to bring his wrath, bring God's wrath against them. So never mind that John's vision during chapter 5 and 6 of Revelation, never mind that it contains language such as, hey, it was granted for the rider on the red horse to take peace from the world or from the earth, or that it was granted to the rider on the pale horse to kill over a fourth of the earth, or that the kings of the earth hide and they ask the rocks to fall on them because the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? Well, I guess according to Bahnsen, all the Gentiles are standing at this point. It's just Israel that's bowing down and cowering down because of the wrath of God. But it's important to see that as powerful as God is, there are some things that God cannot do, right? He cannot go against his nature. He cannot go against his word. And God cannot lie, and God cannot break his covenant with Israel. So when we see that this covenant, this Abrahamic covenant that God made with Abraham, or with Abram back in the day, that you see that there are in Genesis chapter 12 elements of what we would call the land blessing, the seed blessing, and then there's another blessing that's given to us, or given to the physical descendants of Abraham. The physical descendants of Abraham, land, seed, and blessing. That land blessing is encapsulated in the subcovenant. You might call it a subcovenant of what's called the land covenant, which is given to Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 30. The seed blessing of the Abrahamic covenant is realized in the Davidic covenant, whereas there will always be the seed of the Messiah will be from the line of David for eternity. The Davidic covenant, which is described in 2 Samuel chapter 7. And then you have the blessing, which is manifested in the new covenant. It's mentioned in Jeremiah 31 and other places, as far as what this extra blessing that is going to be given as well. So anyway, the Abrahamic covenant and the sub-covenants of the Abrahamic covenant. Think about the Abrahamic covenant, as you guys know and gals know, is that this is an unconditional covenant, okay? God made a covenant with himself, because where was Abram at this time that this covenant was being cut? Whenever the torch in the oven was passing through the animals, God put Abram to sleep, put him in a coma for a little while, and he made this covenant with himself, God did. So in essence, it's an unconditional covenant that God promises to fulfill every detail of these covenants with the physical descendants of the Jewish people. This covenant cannot be delayed. The covenant can be delayed due to the disobedience or unbelief of the Jewish people, but the covenant can never be rendered null and void. And so God will fulfill this covenant with Israel. He'll fulfill these sub-covenants with Israel one of these days. And so I want to make sure that we understood this. Okay, you can't just take these covenants and say, "Oh, they're no longer going to be given to Israel. They're not going to be given to the church." You just can't make that claim, because God did not make a covenant with the church. He made a covenant with Israel. Okay, and so we even see this in Jeremiah 31, right? It says here, "Thus says the Lord, who gives the sun for light by day, and the fixed order of the moon and the stars for light by night, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. If this fixed order departs from me, declares the Lord, then the offspring of Israel also will cease from being a nation before me." So if you think that Israel is just going to be ignored and neglected and no longer a part of God's plan, then what God is saying, well, before that happens, all the stars and the moon and the suns are going to be disappearing from the sky before that happens. Okay, it's not going to happen. And I think it's important to understand that God cannot lie. He cannot break his covenant with Israel. Verse 20, here we go. And so we have here the second Bible blunder from Bahnsen is number 2 is that prosperity promises to Israel are given to the church. Prosperity promises to Israel are given to the church. Now, Bahnsen says this. He says, we will, however, see a general improvement in the earth's condition morally and culturally, politically, educationally, artistically, and on it goes. In which case, the prophecies of the Old Testament that speak of prosperity for God's kingdom are to be interpreted both figuratively and literally, depending on the context, okay, and depending upon the author's intention. So, as he quotes this, you can kind of see that there's a buffet style of exegesis here, where you can pick and choose according to their theology whether or not to take a prophecy literally or to take it figuratively and so forth. So I'm sure that when he's talking about this prosperity coming upon the church, I'm sure guys like Kenneth Copeland and other prosperity teachers are giving Bahnsen a big amen on that one. So Bahnsen has problems with his hermeneutical method. So my question is, if all these blessings of the covenants are to be given to the church, then why aren't postmillennialists over in Jerusalem right now protesting and demanding that the land be given to them? Okay, you don't see that, right? Okay, next one here. Bahnsen says, or basically, this is my quote in the paper regarding what we just talked about. Bahnsen's inconsistent hermeneutical method and postmillennial presuppositions caused him to alter the Bible's chronological timeline as if it were a scene from the movie Back to the Future. His belief that Old Testament prophecies of prosperity to Israel are meant for the church exposes Bahnsen's replacement theology. Conflating and confusing Israel and the church is akin to committing spiritual identity fraud. Okay. Number 3 of Bahnsen's Bible blunders. Number 3 is the misidentification of Israel in the book of Revelation. So if you remember in Revelation chapter 12, it talks about a woman and it talks about a dragon, and that the woman is to give birth. The dragon's waiting there to devour the child and all that. This is what Bahnsen says about Revelation chapter 12. He says, having lost the spiritual battle, Satan turns to physical persecution against the woman, that is, against the people of God. In particular, he sought to destroy the Jewish church in AD 70. So when we take a look at Revelation chapter 12, it says, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she was with child. And she cried out, being in labor and in pain to give birth. But here, Bahnsen doesn't believe that this is Israel, but we would hold the opinion that this woman here is represented as Israel, not the church. Even though, basically, when you take a look at this woman has the moon and the stars, and you can easily see as you go back into the Old Testament, a lot of times when you're trying to determine what is Revelation talking about, well, basically, if you get stumped on something or confused, go back to the Old Testament, because there are so many references of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation that help explain things. And here you can kind of see that this is obviously talking about the dream that Joseph had, whereas Jacob or Israel is the father. Rachel is the mother here, and how that she is with child and that she cries out and so forth. So it's definitely referring to Joseph's dream in Genesis chapter 37. In fact, Arnold Fruchtenbaum would also agree with this as well. He says, now a good reason that this woman cannot be the church is that it would be an anachronism with the church giving birth to Christ, whereas the opposite is true. So in other words, he says that the church did not give birth to Jesus, Israel did, but Jesus gave birth to the church. So he's got it backwards here. Bahnsen does. Okay, and then the last one right here, the fourth Bahnsen Bible blunder is this: Israel will be destroyed by God. Not even to the point where he believes that they will be punished by God or disciplined by God. He full out says that Israel will be destroyed by God. So when he takes a look at the seal judgments in Revelation 5 and 6 and the events we just talked about in Revelation chapter 12, Bahnsen says, John sees a prophecy where Israel is going to be destroyed by God. And we see earthly events where Israel is being destroyed and the kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is going to ascend. Satan himself is foiled when God destroys the Jewish people. He did so in AD 70, and the Christians were not destroyed in AD 70. But look at this, only the unbelieving Jews were. So that's his rationale for his thoughts here. And what we, I think that that there's a news flash here for Bahnsen, and I don't know if he missed his history class that day. We do believe, and we do, I believe it was who was I just lost the name of the historian. You guys could probably help me out there. The historian Josephus, thank you. Josephus said that between 600,000 and 1.1 million Jews were killed in AD 70. But it's one thing to be killed; it's another thing to be destroyed. And so I'm sure that he and other post-mills were not very happy whenever they learned that Israel returned back to her land in 1948. Because the Jews will never be completely destroyed. In fact, in Amos chapter 9, verse 8, Amos says, behold, the eyes of the Lord God are on the sinful kingdom, and I will destroy it from the face of the earth. He destroys the kingdom, right? He destroys the northern and southern kingdom at that point in time. But nevertheless, he says, I will not totally destroy the house of Jacob. Okay, so there will be Jews that will continue to live on. Israel will not be destroyed. And so to conclude, many of Bahnsen's hermeneutical conclusions are bewildering, but the average Christian just sees them as benign or harmless. I mean, after all, what difference does it make if somebody holds to postmillennial thought, right? If they want to hold that thought, does it really actually matter to the church these days? Well, here's some guys that would beg to differ with that opinion. First of all, Alva J. McLean, who wrote an amazing book called The Greatness of the Kingdom. If you don't have this in your library, I would really encourage you to do so. The Greatness of the Kingdom by Alva J. McLean, who is the co-founder and the first president of Grace Seminary in Illinois. He basically says that the problem with postmillennial thinking is that the church loses its pilgrim character, and the sharp edge of its divinely commissioned witness is blunted. And so it becomes an ecclesia, which is not only in the world, but also of the world, right? So as they're trying to reform the world, they're becoming very worldly in the process of doing so. And so postmillennialism and preterism forgets that just as the regeneration of the soul, only God can effect the miracle. Even so, the regeneration of the world can only be wrought by the intrusion of regal power from on high. Only Jesus can usher in the kingdom and usher in the millennium. That's not for man to do. It's not for the church. It's not a job description for the church. And then we also have Andy Woods here, President Schaeffer Seminary and pastor of Sugarland Bible Church in Texas here. He wrote another fabulous book called The Coming Kingdom. If you don't have this, you can get this at truegracebooks.com. He basically says, if the church pursues worldly power, she becomes distracted from her divine mission to fulfill the Great Commission, which is in Matthew chapter 28. And so basically what he says here, if the church goes off and starts getting into social justice and social causes and trying to take over Hollywood, trying to take over Washington, they're distracted from her divine mission, which is to fulfill the Great Commission to spread the gospel around the world. And then from my paper, I made an observation here too that I'd like to include, that any theological system that fails to see a programmatic distinction between Israel and the church, or believes that the church has replaced Israel, suffers from a misunderstanding of God's unconditional promises and is short-sighted because of its theological narcissism. Okay? As evidenced in church history, when men believe that God has forgotten and forsaken Israel, the growth of anti-Semitism escalates. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the world today. As we've gotten away from the Bible and the church has looked in other places and other philosophies, we've seen the rise of anti-Semitism, especially disturbing trends within the church even. We see that those things are escalating. Olivier Melnick, who is a podcaster, a Messianic believer, he's spoken at the Schaeffer Conference in the past. He says this: does replacement theology lead believers in Yeshua to an anti-Semitic view of Israel and the Jewish people? Or is it instead the influence of centuries of unaddressed anti-Semitism in the church that has led to a theological approach that replaces Israel with the church? The answer is both. So both of these dynamics are taking place, especially within the church at this time. And so postmillennial blindness towards Israel is a complex combination of eye conditions. I call it basically being nearsighted and farsighted at the same time. We see that postmillennialists like Bahnsen suffer from both nearsightedness and farsightedness. And what I mean by that, from a nearsighted perspective, as they approach the scriptures, they're allowing their personal presuppositions to affect their interpretation. So instead of exegeting the scriptures, bringing out from the scriptures what the meaning is supposed to be from what the author's intention is, they're reading or eisegeting their own personal belief systems into the scriptures and making the scriptures fit their theological presuppositions. And then from a far-sighted perspective, they're using faulty hermeneutics, right? They decide to, and we've talked about this, and in my paper, you'll see it mentioned more often, that where something is supposed to be taken literal, many times Bahnsen takes it figuratively or spiritual or allegorical. And on other matters that should be interpreted as metaphors or figures of speech, he decides to take those things literal, just so that it matches up with this theology. And so he's got an inconsistent hermeneutic. And so what we would say is that as you and I, as we are Bible students, and in our intention to exegete the scriptures properly, the way that the biblical authors meant for them to be interpreted, we have to have the correct vision for seeing things the way that they truly are. And the way that we do that, as you guys know, is what's called the literal, grammatical, historical, contextual method of interpretation. Sometimes you might hear it called the LGH method or the LGHC method, but basically taking the scriptures at their plain sense of things, which means we recognize that there are figures of speech, and we will treat figures of speech as figures of speech, right? It's not a wooden literal interpretation, but to read the scriptures in this way is the best way to do so. But Bahnsen regularly exegetes passages in different ways from this LGHC method. This is the correct way. And there are traps. If we stray from this method, even we as dispensationalists have to be on the alert against straying from this system. If we're not careful and we mindlessly leave this method for the purpose of seeking some new or exotic interpretation, then we too can suffer a debilitating eye disease. But the more that you and I adhere to the literal, grammatical, historical, contextual method of interpretation, the more your Bible interpretation will be awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for letting me share with you guys today. And I will turn the mic back over to Paul to see where we go from here. And I will stop sharing my screen. But I hope that's a blessing for y'all.
Thanks so much, Morgan. I appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
It seems we went a bit longer than anticipated. However, we also started a little bit early. Are you good to answer questions perhaps for 15 minutes instead of the planned 30?
Yeah, that sounds fine. You bet.
Great.
I can definitely do that. I've got a meeting in about 30 minutes, and so we're good. We're good.
Yep. It seems Anthony Dreesen has his hand up. You are muted. While Morgan was presenting, I turned everybody on mute and turned off the cameras because we were having some problems with the live stream over in Bournemouth. So, yes, there he is. Anthony, go for it.
Am I on? All right. So you brought up the Trump administration having some ties with this group, and some background for me. I graduated at Shepherd Seminary in 2018, and I remember some classmates starting to bring up some of these ideas, and at the time thinking, hey, that's kind of weird, and here we are 6 years later, and they've got some influence in office. So my question is more political. At what point do we start to distance ourselves from this Christian national postmillennial camp? That up to this point, I've seen a lot of hey, this is good. They're on our side. They're not the liberal left. But now they're starting to, if they get what they want, we're all in jail. So I guess, what do you think about that?
That's a great question. And I feel free for Paul or whoever also to kind of chime in as you guys see fit here. So I would say, in fact, if you watch Andy Wood's pastor's what's it called? Pastor's perspective, PPOV, pastor's perspective, or pastor's point of view. That's what it is. Thank you, Chris. Pastor's point of view. He actually mentioned Paula White on his last PPOV, his podcast. She got in bed with, and I don't say that literally, but she got in bed with a bunch of Moonies. And actually spoke on this idea of enlightenment from the Reverend Sun, sponsored by Reverend Sun Young Moon. And so here she is supposed to be representing Christianity, but now she is sort of bringing together other parts of other faiths, other religions, to basically move towards sort of like a one world model where we have a one world model, almost to the idea of when you're thinking of Revelation, kind of like a one world religion, where she's kind of buying into saying, hey, we have a lot of commonalities. We all want world peace and that type of thing. So I would say, we definitely theologically, we need to make sure that there are clear walls of delineation between these things. Is it possible that we can come together in the areas of some things that should be fixed by government, and I think probably there are some commonalities, some things that we should come together on certain political matters, but on matters of theology, we definitely need to have a voice out there that speaks the truth, and more people to go online to kind of expose theonomy for what it is, and preterism for what it is. So I would encourage more people to chime in, and any thoughts on that. Paul, any thoughts on that by you?
It's interesting that you mentioned Paula White going in a one world kind of direction. Uh, this is a book that I've been studying recently for my dissertation research in response to Russism, which is the ideology fueling the genocide of the Ukrainian people as part of Russia's struggle against the West. And there's a post-mill thinker who's actually developing the Russian model as one that he believes we in America should adopt for ourselves. Part of that is he builds a case that, well, fascism is actually a pretty good idea. It falls short in that it is somewhat racist in some of its forms, and that it doesn't have God at the center. But we should have a multipolar world that is a Christian revision of the fascism of old, to oversimplify his argument. That's on a post-millennial platform. That's his eschatology. And being as how the Bible does not tell us how to build the kingdom, the Bible doesn't tell us how to build the kingdom because the kingdom is not now. But since there are no instructions for how to build the kingdom, it should come as no surprise whenever we see post-mill people trying to use the government to build their spirit kingdom. And that can come in many forms. It can be in the older globalist form, like Paula White seems to be following, as well as the sub-globalist multipolar form, both of which would be in opposition, I think, to God's design for the country as a unit of society.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say too, there's if you go onto social media, there's this hashtag that you see on X of Christ is King. Well, you think, okay, that seems harmless enough, but I think when you see that there is some diabolical ness, if that's a word, behind this hashtag, that Christ is King is talking about that Christ is King on the earth right now, and that which means that there's some hints of anti-Semitism from those that are using this hashtag Christ is King, right? So it's again them trying to take matters into their own hands and to usher in the king, or to usher in the second return of Christ, trying to make this world better. Now, I think from a Christian perspective, I think from our perspective, it's good to be involved in a school board. It's good to be able to try to make changes, so that our kids have a righteous environment by which to grow up. We don't want to promote sin. We want to promote righteousness, right? But we also understand that we don't put all of our eggs into politics. We don't say that Donald Trump is our savior, right? And many of these people, that's their mindset, that they are just on the bandwagon. And I think there's a real danger to that. The church no longer becomes the church in the way that God has designed it, and that Jesus has given us the marching orders, right? Yep.
I see Pat's hand is up as well.
Hey, Morgan,
Hey,
appreciate
Pat.
your paper. Thanks for that. This is very good.
Thanks, sir.
A lot of stuff that I am not up to speed on like I should be. You use the term presuppositional, maybe in a couple of ways, I mean, related ways, but so I consider myself presuppositional in my apologetics. And by that, what I mean by that, and I think it's what this is generally understood as, is that God has to do the convicting. We cannot argue someone into faith in Christ. But you seem to do is that term also used as a hermeneutic, a presuppositional hermeneutic? That seems to be how that's how what I inferred from what you said. Is that what you meant, or
Okay.
is that how it gets used?
No, I hear you. And so I would say that, like I said, these guys, even though we would disagree with them on an eschatological basis here, and also ecclesiastical thinking, and also from other areas of theology, the very fact that Cornelius Van Til and the others were heavily involved with presuppositional apologetics, I would say, hey, that's fantastic. One of the things that Bahnsen and others, they would actually debate atheists and just destroy them. They were incredibly smart men and very wise in many matters like this. And so the presuppositional apologetics that they use, I don't have anything against that method of understanding. That, to my knowledge anyway, to come from a presupposition that already believes in the Christian worldview that there is a God, instead of having to prove a God, they come from a perspective that there is a God and that the Bible is God's word. And now let's talk about these types of things. And so I would say, from my understanding, is that presuppositional apologetics is a thumbs up, not necessarily a thumbs down on that. It's just the fact that they are bringing their own personal presuppositions into exegeting the scriptures and thus committing the sin of eisegesis, right? And they're getting a different interpretation than we would on that. Does that help out?
Yeah. So you're kind of borrowing that term then. Is that, or is that
Yeah.
a widely understood way that that's used?
Yeah, I think presuppositional apologetics is one thing, but then bringing your own presuppositions, your own pre-thinking into interpreting the scriptures, that's a separate issue. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat. Good question.
Hi, Morgan.
Hey, Sim. How you doing, buddy?
Hi, thanks. I was wondering, did you stumble on any quotes or topics related with R.C. Sproul? Uh, Reason why I'm asking is because Kevin Gentry, I mean, most people on the pew don't know about him, but R.C. Sproul, people know about him. I know that you wrote a commentary last day, according to Jesus. So, did you stumble with any quotes or things related with him?
Yeah, I was thinking of actually going in that direction and trying to bring in some of the quotes from R.C. Sproul, because he is also a postmillennialist and obviously had a huge platform with his radio ministry, TV ministry, and that type of thing. I just didn't decide. I decided, just in the interest of time, so to speak, try to not inculcate that into the thing. But yeah, and Kenneth Gentry. Yeah, I believe Andy Woods, that his PhD dissertation, if I'm correct, one of his dissertations was a refutation on Kenneth Gentry's book, or his books, or his theology on that. So yeah, Gentry, R.C. Sproul. There's a number of names out there that really helped to popularize this postmillennial thinking. Yeah. Hey, thanks for bringing that up, Sim. Good.
And another question is, did you stumble or did you find in your research the way they try to explain Galatian, the usual text, Galatians chapter 6, Romans chapter 2, Galatians chapter 3. Did you saw in your studies, do they try to explain those texts, or they just quoting those texts without any, you know, um, explanation on how they came up with their view?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I know that in the paper that I've quoted more scriptures than I was able to quote here, because we're dealing with several other issues in the paper. So I would say maybe grab a copy of Pneumatikos if you haven't already, and take a look at the paper. And you can actually go online also to chafer.edu, and you can see a digital copy of it as well. So, but yeah, thanks so much, buddy. Appreciate you.
Hey, thank you so much, Morgan. I appreciate you.
All right. Did Derek have a
He is
question?
missing. So
Okay. All right.
this has
Well,
been
very good.
Morgan Arnold with the International Society for Biblical Hermeneutics speaking on postmillennialism's blindness toward Israel. Thank you so much for tuning in.